What if Alexander survived? Episode 1, The Battle of Aden. Alexander the Great died in our timeline in 323 BC, leaving behind a nation that was split between his generals. This peace never lasted, and the Diadochi Wars ensued, won by 3 generals, Cassander, Seleucus and Ptolemy, 2 of which had territory at the beginning. Seleucus had none. But the question we are going to ask today is, what if Alexander survived his illness in 323 BC and decided to continue his invasion? Would he succeed, and what would change? Welcome to episode 1 in our first What If series. In 323 BC, after recovering from his fever, Alexander continued to organise his forces. Just before he planned to march to Tyre, Alexander found out about the birth of his son in Babylon in August 323 BC. Alexander postponed his invasion because of that, but also because the 15,050 elephants Porus was meant to have sent hadn't arrived on time and were struggling to get through modern-day Iran. Alexander decided to name his son Archelaus after Archelaus I, his great-grandfather, who had centralised the army and made it very offensive. He'd also re-established tactics and drawn up some very new ones, stuff Alexander had used himself, like the phalanx. Archelaus had made Macedon a power to be reckoned with, attacking Athenian possessions in Thrace and Chalcidice, capturing several cities and fortresses before making peace. He'd also campaigned against the Illyrians, who raided his borders and threatened his allies, the Thracians, who were allied with Athens, and Lycidae, a tribe in western Macedonia that had resisted his rule. After 3 months in Babylon, Alexander set out for Tyre. He visited Damascus, where he appointed Antipater sergeant for his son, just in case he died on campaign, and founded a city called Arcadia, after his son on the now Al-Khalim in modern-day Lebanon. In December 323 BC, Alexander sent a message to Yathma Bayan II, the king of Liphonite. Bayan II was offered the whole of Arabia to govern under the command of Alexander. Yathma declined, but first summoned other Arabian countries in a coalition. The Gurians, Sabians, Nabonidans, and Quadrites all accepted and formed under one banner.
The total army size of this army would have been around 160 to 300,000 men. This is the sum of the Nabateans, who had the largest army. Zebediah I was the king in 312 in our timeline. When Antigonus sent his son Demetrius to raid the kingdom, so I'm taking the educated guess at saying he would have been king in 323 BC. The Sabian kingdom could have mustered around 40 to 80,000 men, and were commanded by Mazumin, according to Diodorus Siculus. Meanwhile, the Quadrites had around 30 to 60,000 men. Their leader was Guindabu. The Hamites probably had the smallest army among the Arabian tribes or kingdoms, with around 20 to 40,000 men. As we know, their king Yathma Bayan II was the leader of that nation. While these were the main 4, there was also the Graeans, who could have mustered 20,000 men. Their king was Strabo, and he was a good military commander, so they put him in charge of the army. We know for certain Alexander's army numbered around 45,000 men during the Battle of Hydapeses. According to some sources, he had 40,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry as his command during that battle. If we include Porus's 15,000 men and another 10,000 men joining in the 3 years after the battle, to the current point in our timeline, that puts Alexander's troop number at 70,000, Alexander having 9,000 cavalry and 61,000 infantry.
Alexander heard of the massive army massing into Book in the Liphonite kingdom, so he guessed that he wasn't going to get a peaceful welcome, more like a hostile one. Alexander decided to march into Nabatea, thus taking the allied army unprepared. Strabo, though, expected this, and had posted small parties of troops to make sure he wouldn't be surprised. So when Alexander crossed the border and marched towards the capital of Nabatea, Strabo quickly marched to meet him. Alexander, hearing of the army's approach, quickly marched back on themselves before flanking the allied army. Strabo, wanting a battle on his own terms, withdrew, but only after careful consideration, and he also left 5,000 men to defend Nabatea. He then withdrew to Tresion.
Strabo's withdrawal wasn't noticed by Alexander, who arrived back at the city on the 8th of February 232 BC and besieged it, thinking the whole Arabian army was in Nabat. which it wasn't. When Alexander didn't attack the 5,000 men in the city during the next month, Strabo realized that an ambush might be possible if he moved quickly. This almost worked out, but a bit of misfortune struck as one of Alexander's scouts found the army just before they struck out and told Alexander, who attacked Nabat, taking the city after a 4 hours battle on the battlements. When Strabo found out, he withdrew to Tresium again, but here he decided to split the army. One half of 800,000 to 150,000 was commanded by Strabo, and this army went to Vassia. The other half was led by Yathmal Bayan II, with Jindabu as his deputy, and this army went to Tabuk. This was a clever plan, as both armies could keep in contact, and it also meant that if Alexander outflanked them or took Tresium, there would be a massive counterattack, as Zedbal I, ruler of Nabatea, was furious about losing the capital. Alexander knew about this as his scouts found out the positions of both armies. His war against the Arabs wasn't going the way he wanted, so he knew he had to get at least one of the armies into a battle. So he marched against the one commanded by Yerathmar. So he marched on Tabuk. Yerathmar heard of Alexander's approach, so held firm waiting for Alexander's attack, which he did on the 15th of March, 232 BC. Yerathmar's army, as we know, was around 80 to 150,000 men strong. Modern sources though estimate towards the lower end of the spectrum and estimated the army at around 90,000 men. After the Nabatean army was there, which would have numbered about 30,000 strong, while the whole of the Lithanite army of around 20,000 men was there, while the Shebans gave 5,000 cavalry and 5,000 infantry, which was a fifth of their army size. While the last 30,000 was the whole of the Quadrite army, with the Quadrites also providing 5,000 cavalry. Alexander's army we already know about, but if you missed it, we'll go over it again. Alexander had 70,000 men under his control, 9,000 of that being cavalry and 61,000 comprising of infantry. Alexander knew that Yerathmar had the high ground, and that the Arabian had used a forest to block the threat posed on the left. Luckily, Alexander realized that the center and the right of the Arabian army was exposed, so sent his cavalry to their left, while the rest of his forces attacked the Arabian right forces. Even though he was attacking up the hill, Alexander moved quickly. Unfortunately, Yerathmar also attacked, and in doing so, Alexander's cavalry almost got split from the main army, with contact only being maintained porous due to messengers having to ride backwards, then to their right, and then forwards again to not get captured. And it also took a long time. On Alexander's right, the fighting was heavy, with Porus withdrawing to re-establish his line. This wasn't meant as a trap originally, but when the whole Arab left attacked, followed by Gindabu, Alexander saw an opportunity. Pulling off some infantry, Alexander led them to the flank of the Arab left and attacked. The Arabs, realizing it was now or never, attacked furiously, and desperate fighting on both sides ensued. After 5 minutes, Alexander managed to smash the Arab left. Yerathmar now withdrew, not wanting the army to be defeated. In the battle, Alexander lost 2,000 men, while the Arabs lost around 20,000 men, including Gindabu, who was succeeded in the Quadrite kingdom by his only daughter Aya the Fourth, who was a warrior princess. Yerathmar retreated to Tabuk, but also sent a messenger to Strabo telling him of the situation. As Alexander was now besieging Tabuk, Strabo marched to his aid, but it was too late, as by the time he arrived, Alexander had taken the city and captured Yerathmar and Aya, forcing both to surrender, with Aya becoming one of Alexander's mistresses. With Zadabal killed in the fighting, Strabo decided to retreat, marching down the coast and setting up camp near Unak, which was the only Lithanite city now loyal to the Arab cause. Strabo had set up a good position, but when the Sheban forces who'd fought at Tabuk told him of Alexander's tactics, he gave up on his plan and marched back to Aden, where Alexander arrived 4 weeks later. A massive siege had begun. As you already know, Alexander's forces, we won't go over them again, but the Arabs this time had 20,000 growing infantry, which was probably the best in the Arabian Peninsula, and 70,000 Shebans, who also provided 10,000 cavalry, which were also very good. The Shebans also had some information as to what Alexander had. Then sieges, these were thrown out the window. As for Alexander's tactics, Alexander had originally planned to wait out the Arabs, But after the long campaign, Alexander knew his soldiers wanted this siege over and done with, so they could head back to Greece, which Alexander had promised them. So after 3 days, which were spent setting up boarding equipment to get on the ramparts, Alexander attacked, and a fierce battle ensued on the ramparts of the city of Aden. The phalanxes were of no use in the siege, so they basically became infantry, but they were still effective as they had been trained previously in infantry techniques. The flash attack that Alexander ordered worked, with the infantry and phalanxes getting onto the battlements within 5 minutes of the attack being ordered, with Porus being the first person onto the battlements, Alexander getting on there later on. Mazoon was in the section Alexander attacked, and quickly engaged him in a duel, while soldiers fell from the battlements or killed all around. Both battled on, with one soldier who survived later described both of them as two commanders fighting for control of a kingdom, both with golden sunlight at their backs. A moment of history was happening. Even as we fought for our lives, we knew it. Probably both of them knew it as well. Suddenly Alexander was pushed over the battlements by Mazoon, but by pure luck he managed to jam his sword into an arrow hole, stopping his fall around and meeting on the floor. He then tugged his sword out and then fell down, breaking his hand but surviving. On the battlements though, it looked like Alexander had fallen to his death, and as if some hidden order had been given, Alexander attacked. The Macedonians attacked with at least 100 times the amount they had before, quickly smashing the Shebans and the Grains to pieces. Strabo and Mazoon jumped from the battlements, falling to their deaths, while the population of Aden was forced into imprisonment, while the city itself was burnt to the ground. Alexander had conquered the Arabian Peninsula in a flash campaign, and the first of our major changes to the world has happened. Due to Alexander conquering the Arabians, the Muslims would never rise, thus the Crusades would never happen, and in the most bizarre twist, the Mongols could probably overrun Europe. Along with this, the Ottoman Empire would never exist either, and neither probably would the Teutonic Knights, who were employed to turn the Muslims. But more changes are coming, as Alexander, he is of a nation which will later become a major powerhouse. This nation is Rome. And so, in our second episode of What If Alexander Survived, the Battle of Rome, we'll see the two biggest nations in the world at this point in Europe butt heads. Join us then when we do the Battle of Rome.